Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Irina Parvanova, and I am a representative of the Center for Biomedical and Population Health Informatics at Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai Health System. And the title of the talk that I'm presenting today is Characteristics of Electronic Informed Consent Platforms for Consenting Patients to Research Studies, a scoping review. Our interest in the topic was based on the fact that we as a team implement our own electronic consent platform for our clinical studies, as well as for the clinical studies of other teams within the Mount Sinai health system, as well as within other institutions in the United States. In addition to that, electronic consent platforms have become extremely popular over the last few years, particularly over the last 2 years during the COVID pandemic. As a reminder, informed consent ensures that research study participants are competent and adequately informed for the studies that they are enrolling and are signing to participate. Electronic informed consent, or e-consent, is currently used for research studies and surgical procedures. The metrics that we looked at in terms of analyzing the qualities of electronic consent include usability, satisfaction, enjoyment, accessibility, enrollment, trust, time, and capacity of participants. The goals of the study were to conduct a scoping review with 3 main objectives: to describe the technological features of current consent platforms, to summarize the usability and efficacies of these platforms in consenting patients, to identify areas of future research regarding electronic consent. The methods that we used for those purposes were search strategies, study strategy, and data extraction. In terms of search strategy, we use the following search terms: electronic consent, or e-consent, or e-consent as a single word, EIC abbreviation of electronic informed consent, and informed consent, and all the studies were only in English. In addition, the study strategy included studies discussing an e-consent platform for all multimedia educational modules. Studies including a description of the features or interface of the e-consent platform, and studies including either usability or efficacy evolution of the platform. The data extraction was focused on first author, year of publication, sample size, study location, research procedure, and methodology. Based on our inclusion criteria, we analyzed 99 studies featuring e-consent. We wanted to see what is the actual breakdown of study types, and we determined that 45% were randomized clinical trials, 26% of the studies featuring electronic consent were observational studies, 16% were pilot studies, 10% were mixed method studies, and 3% were focus group studies. In addition to that, we were interested to see how many of those 99 studies included a comparison to the original version of consent, which is a paper-based consent. And we determined that 61% of those studies looked into that comparison. Furthermore, we were interested to see what kind of platforms, electronic consent platforms, were used in these studies. It turned out that 81% of the researchers used their own research platforms of electronic consent, 16% outsourced that, and 3% did not specify. In addition to the actual consent where the patient signs and agrees to participate in the study, a lot of electronic consent platforms include an educational module, which further ensures that the patients are appropriately informed and aware of the type of study and what will be required from them, and all the necessary points that are included into an informed consent form. So the educational module ensures that understanding. Based on our analysis, 100% of those educational modules featured visual features, 83% included auditory features, and 71% were interactive. In addition to that, we looked at the following metrics that signify the quality of the electronic consent according to the participants. We look into usability, and in 48% of the studies, usability of the electronic consent was investigated. In 45% of the studies, the satisfaction of the enrolling patients was also examined. In 42% of the study, the enjoyment and the preference to electronic consent was looked at. In addition, in 39% of the studies, accessibility of the platform was assessed. And only in 6% of the studies, the enrollment of patients using electronic consent versus paper-based consent was analyzed. In 77% of the studies, the knowledge level of patients was assessed using electronic consent platform. In 29% of the studies, the patients were asked to disclose how trustworthy the electronic consent platform was. In 45% of the studies, patients disclosed their opinion on time to consent using electronic consent platform versus paper-based consent. And in 13% of the studies, the capacity to consent was assessed as well. So based on the observations of our study, we can say that the impact of electronic consent platforms for research purposes became crucial during the COVID-19 pandemic. Based on our scoping review, we determined that 81% of the electronic consent platforms were developed by the team that published the study. We also determined that all platforms contained visual elements, 71% of the platforms included auditory elements, and 84% of the platforms were interactive. With that said, there were certain limitations that we need to acknowledge during based on our analysis. For once, most of the people that preferred electronic consent or participated in the studies that were featured in our analysis had higher education and were English speaking. So regardless that, however, our observation is that electronic consent improves patients' usability, satisfaction, knowledge, and trust scores versus paper consent. Another very important feature for electronic consent is that it was for all the interactive platforms, they ensured that patients' knowledge is improved. And based on that, a lot of people who had any kind of disabilities were better able to utilize electronic consent versus paper-based consent. In addition, none of the 99 feature studies reported decrease in outcomes from electronic consent. Hence, it seems that the enrollment ratio, in addition to all of the positive features, did not go down. Thank you very much for your attention, and please let me know if you have any questions.